Back here on Busted Open, Dave LaGreca, Mark Henry. Mark, we've been talking a lot on the show about 350 Days, starring Bret Hart, starring superstar Billy Graham. It's hitting cinemas July 12th. Again, just for one night only on July 12th, you get to see nationally 350 Days. And please go to www.phantomevents.com/350 days to see this amazing documentary. And, you know, Mark, we have talked about it, and what better way to talk about it further and further the discussion than having on an icon, a legend, a WWE Hall of Famer, Bret the Hitman Hart. Bret, how are you this morning?
I'm very good. Life's good.
Life is good. And talk a little bit about 350 Days. We talked about it a lot here on the show. You have a lot of involvement in this movie that's going to hit theaters on July 12th.
Well, I think I just try to be honest and answer the questions that they put forward. I think it's a very interesting document that sort of captures, the less glam a part of the wrestling business, but at the same time, it shows that there's a passion with everybody that did it. A lot of the guys that I saw in the film, Jimmy Snuka, Ox Baker, as tough as the life of a wrestler is, very few of them would change anything about it. They love the time they had and the people they spent their time with.
Bret, this is Mark. You're obviously one of the Mount Rushmore caliber guys in the business and sport of professional wrestling over the last 100 years. How do you feel about all of the time that you spent on the road, like the years that your peak years? How do you feel about being away from home? All the amounts of time that you were away from home?
Well, in retrospect, like looking back on it, I wish probably like every other wrestler that it hadn't been quite so hard. I really think that if we'd had maybe just 30 more days a year off, it would have had a big difference with my family, my kids. This life in general would have been better if I could have made it home. I'm not saying so much more that it would affect the business, but just in a reasonable sense. I think we were gone too much. I think they pushed us too hard. I think it was too much of a nose to the grindstone and money driven sort of mentality. WWE was so, if you didn't make the town, then you got somebody to take your place, and they just keep going from there. Like you had to give up everything to do that job, and I think, I don't know if they liked the fact that they ruined so many marriages by working people so overly hard, or as Vince says, it's just the nature of the business. I don't know, but I mean, I think, if I could have just got home a little bit more, been home for Christmases, and I see today in the schedule, I don't think they even work around Christmas time. They get a big break. If I'd had that, I might have done a lot to make my kids their lives more full. Just if I could have been home at Christmas times and Halloween and certain times of the year when your kids really need you.
The most I came in 90, 95, 96, and during that time, there was really no territories left, but I was still able to work 30 days in a row sometimes, like maybe 27 days. What's the longest stretch of days that you were on the road?
The longest stretch was I did 64 days, and then I did 65 days back to back.
Wow!
Like one or 2 days in the middle, and that was my record. That was the hardest I ever went. But there was times in 30 days that I might have wrestled 45 times. There's some. Sometimes they really squeeze the life out of you as far as wrestling goes, and just I would wrestle at a TV taping. I might wrestle 3 full-on matches, and still do interviews and promos till 1 o'clock at night, where you're selling each market, and and taking pictures and doing Make-A-Wish kids, and it's like they will squeeze every bit of life out of you too. Like you just do go. Like when you're a top guy, like I was with WWE, like John Cena or Hulk Hogan or some of these guys that were top guys. I mean, they put so much weight on your back to carry this and carry that, and you got to do media stuff at 5 a.m. East Coast time because you're out in California. Like, there's just so many things that they get out of you all the time that you never take in. There's no payback for some of the stuff that you sacrifice, and sometimes they can just like all those sacrifices and all that. Everything you do to try to keep the big machine running, there's not much loyalty or regard given to anybody that I've never found the wrestling business had much loyalty for anybody. It was always like, what can you do for me today? It doesn't matter what you did for them yesterday.
And Bret, you mentioned that loyalty, and here you are explaining how you miss birthdays and anniversaries and Christmas because you had to be on the road because you were the face of the franchise, and yet it ended as badly as it did. I mean, that's heartbreaking.
It can be, but like you can tell by it's not about. In the end, sometimes it's not always about what you made and how much they appreciate it. It's more what it meant to you. And I find with my journey as a wrestler that I made a lot of great friends and had a lot of great memories, and had a lot of great experiences. So I'm able to sort of justify my love for what I did, and I had I was somebody that grew up in the wrestling family. It was in my blood all through my life. But at the same time, I think I realized when probably in the mid '90s when I was the champion that people relied on me, and I was creating doing something special, that I was making a lasting mark in my profession, that someday that 50 years from now or 100 years from now they'll still be watching Bret Hart matches and talking about how was I as good as this guy or was I as good as that guy. And I think I was trying to make a mark and make a lasting impression that would last forever. And I believe maybe I accomplished that. I really worked hard all the time. It seemed like whenever the camera's on, I went out there and gave my best performances all the time and tried to have the best matches with each wrestler that I worked with. And, I look back on my career from Roddy Piper to Mr. Perfect to my brother Owen to the Bulldogs to Kevin Nash to, you could just go on and on. They all, at one point or time, have told me that their number one favorite match that they ever had was with me, and they'll talk about a certain match. And, I take pride in all that. Especially with so many wrestlers that are gone today.
Yeah.
But I was an artist and a really specialized performer that prided myself on not injuring anybody. I never injured one wrestler in my whole career. And I really, when I look back on my career, I was, if you looked up on the lineup sheet in the dressing room and saw that you were wrestling against Bret Hart, I wanted you to have a sigh of relief and go, it's going to be an easy match tonight. And it's going to be a fun match, and it's going to be entertaining, and it's going to be maybe my best match that I had in weeks because I'm wrestling Bret Hart. And, I tried my best to do that and give wrestlers comfort and know that, we don't have to kill each other out there tonight. We're just going to go out there and really have fun and tell a great story and have a great night of escape, and at the same time get you one day closer to getting home to your family. There was a lot of good things that came from the fellowship that I had with other wrestlers, and I think that definitely came true when in watching 350 Days. That you can see the passion in Jimmy Snuka's eyes still, and you can still see the passion in Tito Santana's eyes when they talk about the business.
And that was the biggest thing. Watching the trailer for 350 Days and seeing Jimmy Snuka with tears in his eyes, talking about his career, talking about how he missed it, and and seeing Ox Baker and seeing these legends that are no longer with us. I mean, it really does touch you.
Well, I think especially with certain guys, Ox Baker, as an example, was a great character in the business. But Jimmy Snuka is sort of in a league all his own. I've heard wrestlers talk about Jimmy Snuka when they first saw him before he ever got in the business, that he was like, he was like Tarzan, like the real life Tarzan. He was ripped with muscles, and he could swim like a fish, and he could jump off the cliffs of in Fiji and places like that. He was just this amazing athlete that got into wrestling. I imagine that if you were in Jimmy Snuka's shoes and you were just a kid in Fiji or whatever, just making surfing and swimming and stuff, that the world of wrestling would open a lot of doors for you that you never could imagine. And I think that's where, I look at myself in the same regard, and I go, I was just a kid, 20 years old, looking for striking out, doing something to make a living that would be fun, and I didn't see myself doing a lot of construction work or heavy labor didn't seem like a fun way to make a living. But wrestling, I always liked the camaraderie. I liked there was always a love and trust that came from your fellow wrestlers that, it's something that, like, when I look at UFC, I always think that's so much the opposite of what I did for a living. What I did for a living was just the opposite to what UFC is. I tried to emulate them and give you the same kind of wrestling performance, except for no animals were going to get harmed in the making of that movie. And it was sometimes a beautiful thing to put together a beautiful match with somebody that would look so intense and so look like you both hated each other, and there was so much bad blood, and you come back and you hug each other behind the dressing room and you shake hands, and you know that he protected your family and you protected his, and you sold tickets and you entertained fans. I mean, there's a certain joy and beauty that can come out of something as bizarre and violent as pro wrestling, that's for sure.
Bret, I described you as an artist before you came on, and for you to say the art, that you're an artist, verifies exactly what I said. From the perspective of all of the guys that watched you and emulated you and copied, I guess would be the greatest, the realest word. Copying is the greatest form of flattery, I guess. But a lot of us, we called you a master psychologist. There was no wasted steps. That everything you did meant something. That something followed your style of wrestling. And I mean, I've talked to guys like The Undertaker and the highest order guys that are on that potential Mount Rushmore wrestling, and they say the same thing about you, that if I had a match with Bret, I knew that it was a night off, that we were going to go out there and tell a hell of a story, and the fans are going to be into it, and we were going to either leave them wanting more or we were going to pay it off and give them what they wanted. And very few wrestlers, even today, can get that done. And I want to commend you for being good motivation and a good role model for me, and allowing me into your home in a time where I really needed somebody to show me the ropes and not be biased. And I want to thank you for that.
Well, you know, you were like my dad would say, a great prospect, and you know, it was just I'm happy that I was able to help that entrance for you, like when you first started, help you. You know, wrestling was never. Like, I always try to make wrestling very simple. You know, doesn't need to be. I think today's wrestling is too complicated. It doesn't need to be so complicated that you have to, you know, pound your head and try to remember stuff, and so much complex moves being done. I like my wrestling to pretend to be real. I think what I had and was lucky I had was I was a really great wrestling fan first. I grew up in the front row watching some of the best and some of the worst wrestlers in the world right up close and studying them and be able to, without ever realizing it, when you're 8, 9, 10, or 12 years old, knowing that you're actually studying pro wrestling up close and seeing the difference between, a Gene Kiniski or a Dory Funk or a Harley Race or a Jimmy Snuka. You're watching all these wrestlers up close. You get to study them. And, I had a privilege of having a front row seat for a long time. I studied wrestling and really, I think I understood it the second I got into it. Like the second someone started explaining to me how it really works, it was like, okay, I think I know how it works because I've seen it. And I always tried my hardest to tell stories, to tell a really good story. And it's not hard to emulate. Like if you're trying to tell a UFC story, like one of these UFC fights, there's a certain drama that comes with the fight and a realism, especially when there's suddenly some change of tempo where suddenly somebody's drilled in the face and the fight's over. It's very, very sudden. And wrestling, you have the privilege of taking key moments like you can in a UFC fight and arranging those, and at the same time you can tell a better story. I just think years ago when WWF first started happening with WrestleManias and stuff, the WrestleManias were often better, more entertaining than the actual Super Bowl, which sometimes was a blowout. And,
yep.
I think wrestling started to become more fun for people than actual real pure sports were. And, I think that's the beauty of what I did anyways. I think was the fact that I was always a fan first. I knew when I talked about an idea with a wrestler, and then you could do this because this will get a reaction that will really work well. And, I just had a sense about a lot of things that, from being a fan first. And, I think that's what made me, maybe the rest of what I was, is that I was a big fan of great wrestling. And I kind of knew when to throw a left turn into the storyline or this would be a good time for change of direction in the story, that we can do this stuff that can happen and blah, 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 that kind of stuff.
Bret, I had a recent, I was working on a TV show in Los Angeles recently, and the guy that sat next to me on the plane, he recognized me and he started telling me stories about him watching wrestling with his dad and his uncle, who were fanatical wrestling fans. And he said that the thing, he said, I'm going to tell you a story and you're going to really relate to this. And I'm sitting there, I'm hoping that it's something that I will be able to tell. And it was. He was saying, I was in Regina, Canada, and sitting in the front row, I guess I was probably 12 years old, and Bret Hart came to the ring, and he put his glasses on my head. And he was telling me this story, and his eyes started welling up. And he was saying how I couldn't believe, here I am now, grown man, and I still have those glasses. And I was like, wow, that's pretty cool, man. I said, I know Bret, and I'm sure that he don't remember every single guy because he did that probably 25,000 times or more. But I guarantee you, every pair of glasses that he put on the kid, he related that to him giving back to his fans. And here I am on the phone with you less than a week later. I don't think that it's just happenstance. I think I was supposed to tell you that.
Well, I do remember a lot of little moments with fans that they might not think I do. And I don't remember that particular one, but, I do remember, and I get this a lot from a lot of fans, that I was their hero when they were 5 or 6 years old, then 8, 9 years old, 10, 11, 12. Like, I was their absolute hero for a certain time in their life when they really needed a hero, or they've always used me as some kind of a standard for how they want their heroes to be. And I meet people today, 25 years later, after and they'll get very emotional and they'll start to break down and tell you how much what it meant that you were a hero during a certain time in their life, or whatever it is. But you realize that what you did is important, and it meant a lot, and it gets a lot of people through tough times that you may have no idea what some kid might be struggling with growing up, whether it's bullying or somebody at school, or anything that's troubled somebody, and you're this hero, this golden sort of light that shines in their life, and then you meet them years later and you blow them off and you walk past them and you don't have time to even hear their story. I see too many wrestlers act like that today, and I try to remember and appreciate every fan that took the time to watch me. And I think autographs, people make too much of an autograph. It's just an autograph. It's just a scribble with your fingers. It takes about 3 seconds to do. And even a picture, like, no one wants to line up and sign autographs and take pictures all day. But one picture with some kid at the airport for 2 seconds is not that hard to do. And I've always been a person that strongly believes that you always appreciate every single fan that you ever had.
Yeah, and Bret, it takes a real man to understand the importance of that with fans. Is that blow off? You lost a fan for life, but you shake a hand or take a picture, you have a fan for their entire lifetime.
It's so true, and I believe that is a big part of my career today. I should have been forgotten a long time ago, I think, but fans that remember me in the old days, like back in the 90s or the 80s with Jimmy Anvil, Heart and Heart Foundation, taking the time to take their pictures when they're waiting out back in the wintertime, back in these arenas, or to take a picture at the airport, or I always try to take the time, and I think I got it from my father. It was always, you got to remember every fan, like try to, because they're the ones that, as long as those fans are there the next week and the week after that, you got a job, and you got to always take care of your fans, and always meant always. And I've seen too many over my career. When I got into wrestling, I had no idea that wrestling would become as popular as where it is today in the world. But I knew that when I was on the ground floor of it, I thought, if I ever get famous, I'll always be good to my fans. Always try to remember that. Don't ever change. And I haven't changed that way. I like to think, and I still, being home a lot, I get to talk to a lot of my friends that knew me before I ever got into wrestling. I think it's fair to say I don't think I've changed that much from being the guy that I was when I was 17 or 18 years old to who I am today. And they're all and they're all very much entwined with the Bret the Hitman Hart character. I mean, people talk about wrestling characters. I was my wrestling character. It wasn't anybody else but Bret the Hitman Hart. I was Bret the Hitman Hart from grade one. Every day was a fight and a struggle and a battle, and living up to something that you weren't quite sure why you were, defending wrestling, and why you believed that you had better wrestling skills than every other kid in the school, and that if they wanted to try you, you had to wrestle them, and you had to beat them, and you had to prove something to them. And that's always, I don't know how many wrestlers, whether Greg Valentine or some of these other second-generation wrestlers that are in this documentary, whether their thoughts are the same, but, I was always carrying a lot of weight around this, in the sense that I was trying to emulate my father and what he meant to the wrestling business. And when I got into wrestling, I tried really hard to be my father or walk in his shoes as much as I could.
Bret, I know you're a big star, because I remember being at your house and answering the door, and it was Aaron Neville.
I don't know much.
And I was like, It's Aaron Neville. Like, I'm like, who? Nobody never famous came to my house. I guess I wasn't a big enough star. But I was like, you know somebody's big when celebrities, like big-time entertainers, come to their house. And, I mean, it was just, like, real eye-opening. How did you develop a relationship with Aaron Neville?
Well, the truth is Aaron was a big fan, and I got to know him a little bit. And it was actually, I think, the King of the Ring, 93 or 94. 93, I think, when I fought, supposed to fight Jerry Lawler, and it turned into me fighting Doink the Clown. And anyway, he was doing the national anthem for that pay-per-view. And Jerry Lawler, who I love Jerry, but he had really stiffed me about 5 or 6 times, and he even busted Owen open with something. And I was pretty mad at him for a couple of months. He had jumped me at the King of the Ring, and this was at SummerSlam, and he had tried to break the scepter over my back. And I don't know if you ever see how big those scepters are, but it was about as thick as a baseball bat. And he tried to break it over, snap it over my back like a toothpick, and it wasn't going to work. And instead, he messed up my back for about 4 months, where it really hurt for me to take a deep breath. I could hardly take a deep breath, and I had to be really careful for a long time with my falls and everything, because I was really hurt. He really hurt me bad for, I'd say, four months anyway. And I counted every day to SummerSlam. I was going to get even with Jerry. And, I was just going to make sure that I threw plenty of potatoes, and that it was a potato fest in there, and that Jerry was paid in full for that scepter smack with me. And if you watch the beginning of that match, he wrapped a crutch around my head in the beginning of the SummerSlam match, when I had Doink in a Boston or the sharpshooter. Lawler came from behind with a crutch he just about took my head off with the crutch and snapped it over my face. And I remember lying on the mat going, I am going to kill this guy. I'm so mad that he just smashed me, and now he keeps trying to kill me, this guy. And I don't know how they wrestle down in Tennessee, but I'm going to open up a can of whoop ass on him right now as soon as I get ready for this match with him. And then the match started. So I got in. I was throwing all kinds of potatoes. Every second punch was real, and I hit him as hard as I could and slammed him as hard as I could. And I really worked on Jerry. Of course, you'd never noticed. He just acted like the same match we always had. But I did finally put him in the sharpshooter at the end of it. And I put him in that sharpshooter, and I left him in that sharpshooter for, I think it was at least 5 minutes. I had him in it. And they were all the agents and everybody were tapping me on the back and trying to, that was the finish. And anyway, I came back to the dressing room, and I was kind of mad at what happened with Jerry. And I was hoping that I kind of got the message across to, be more careful with my head and my face. And I remember Jerry crawled back to the dressing room like an alligator.
He crawled back.
Actually stand up. Crawled on his stomach all the way up the aisle, all the way back to the dressing room, and lay on the floor. And I just remember Aaron Neville looked at me and goes, with just the driest kind of voice, he just said, "You really did a job on that guy."
Bret the Hitman Hart. Bret, we got to get you back on again when you have more time. We really appreciate the time today. Again, 350 days premiering in theaters across the nation. July 12th. Go to phantomevents.com/350 days. Bret, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show today.
All right. Thanks for having me, guys.